Good afternoon, or welcome to LBMA webinars. We are pleased to have you join us today to hear about the Responsible Gold Guidance version 9. To talk about it are Neil Harby, the Chief Technical Officer at LBMA, and Nirali Shah, the Chief Operating Officer at Responsible Gold Supply Chain LLC. So before I hand over to them, I'm going to take you through a bit of housekeeping. If you do have any questions throughout this webinar, I'm sure you will have plenty. Please drop them into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, depending on which version you have. If you can't see that, can't find it, please send us an email at ask@lbma.org.uk. That goes for anybody who's listening to this afterwards. If you do have any questions, please send them through to us because we do want to hear them. So Neil, that is the end of my introduction, and now it is time for you to take the floor.
Hey, thank you, Taylor, and welcome everybody who's joined us on this webinar. And we are going to be discussing the Responsible Gold Guidance version 9. But just a bit of history of why we're here now is that in version 8, we introduced environmental, social, and governance issues, which ESG, as you all know, is very, very important. Version 9 is really building upon version 8, and it's all about constantly developing, evolving, and making the responsible sourcing program make sure that it remains fit for purpose. So we're now at the stage where we have a version 9 draft. We are putting it out for consultation, and we need industry feedback hopefully by 20th of July 2021. Because there is a view that we will launch and make it mandatory for refiners from the 1st of January 2022. So the purpose of this webinar is we would like your views on the draft, but also I'm joined by Nirali Shah, who will take us through the changes between version 9 and version 8. So I'd like to introduce Nirali, as Taylor said. Nirali is the Chief Operating Officer at Responsible Gold Supply Chain LLC, which is a technology company developing blockchain-based traceability solutions for the precious metals sector. She's got 20 years experience in designing and delivering management reporting and audit frameworks for multinational organizations, having spent most of her career in professional practice. Since qualifying as a financial auditor, Nirali focused on transferring her audit skills and experience to the corporate sustainability field, developing assurance methodologies. Until 2 years ago, Nirali was at Deloitte, their UK sustainability service for the extractive sector, working with international mining houses on their environmental, social, and governance footprints. So you can see the link there. Risk assessment, stakeholder management, and reporting frameworks, and independence assurance engagement. But this is the important thing. Since 2012, Nirali has specialized in responsible sourcing of precious metals and has led ISEA 3000 audits of a number of LBMA good delivery refineries in Canada, the CIS, China, Europe, and South Africa. I think the South African one I'm familiar with. I think that's where I met Nirali's, shall we say, tenacious drive to make sure that we make this work. So she established Deloitte's global LBMA audit program, developing technical resources and providing local member firms with both on-the-ground training and remote support. But having spent 7 years in Johannesburg and working with corporate clients throughout Africa, as well as undertaking regular site visits to assets in South America and Asia, Nirali has a sound understanding and appreciation of local challenges and nuances with respect to ESG implementation and audits. No surprise then that we've asked Nirali to help us to develop the Responsible Gold Guidance version 9, and she's helped us really a lot with this draft, and we appreciate your support and input here, Nirali. So thanks for joining me today.
Great, thanks Neil, thanks for the kind words. From my side, it's always only been a pleasure to work with you, and as it is to be involved in this really important initiative to keep driving the sector forward.
Yeah, definitely. Next slide, Taylor, please. Okay, so just a couple of key documents and processes that we need to cover. Obviously, as the ex-refiner on the call, what's important is reaching out to the refiners and saying that these are the documents you need to be aware of. These are the documents that I know you are aware of. So as we develop version 9, all of these documents are being developed and the process is being developed alongside there. But it's very important that you familiarise yourselves with the new version of these documents. In terms of auditors, Nirali?
Yeah, so just in parallel to the RGG revisions or the Responsible Gold Guidance revision process, LBMA also has initiatives in place to strengthen the audit side of things and the audit quality. So, LBMA rolled out audit training last year, which I was also involved in, where we were able to train some 120 auditors worldwide virtually. The third-party audit guidance will be aligned to version 9. An auditor toolkit is also being developed to support consistency in reporting and application. I believe that the approved auditor list is reviewed continuously as well.
Yes, that's certainly something that we've made sure we're focusing on equally, as well as the refiners, because obviously the audit program is only as good as the audit and the auditors. But as much as the refiners and auditors are involved at the coalface, there's other stakeholders that we need to get involved in this process, because you can't just look at the refineries in isolation. And I know traditionally back in 2012, the refiners were always seen as the pinch point, and that's where we needed to focus. And that was probably right at the time. But there are other stakeholders in the entire supply chain, from the producers at the beginning producing the metal, the miners, the recyclers, the smelters producing the metal, all the way down the value chain to the downstream users, whether it's the jewelers, the electronics industry, but obviously our members as the investment banks. But it's more important, I think, that we don't operate in isolation. So we need the intergovernmental organizations involved as well. Certainly, we've done a lot of work with the OECD as they started off with launching their due diligence process, but also the NGOs. I know sometimes we don't see eye to eye with the NGOs, but that doesn't mean that we can't work together for a common goal. So I think it's very important that if the NGOs have got information that will help us make our program better, I think it's important that we have that engagement, but understand the rules of engagement to make sure that we're productive and constructive, shall I say. But also there's a lot of other interested parties involved in what we're doing, whether it's the mainstream press or whether it's just the person buying his wedding ring. So it's important that any other stakeholders who want to get involved in this consultation process, please feel free to get involved. And if you looked at that first slide, there is an online survey that is available. So if you want to give your input, please do. Next slide. So this is roughly the timeline, but I think the main key point here is that this will be enforced from the 1st of January 2022. So Nirali, it's been quite a steep learning curve, quite development program. Are you happy with how the timeline's going?
Yeah. I think the obviously we're going through this first round of consultation. We expect perhaps a shorter consultation, second round of consultation again in September, and then expect to release the final version by the end of Q3. And I think it's important to also note that alongside this, the refiners toolkit is also being updated to align to version 9, and will hopefully be released at the same time. That's the intention, as with the updated audit guidance.
Yeah,
so, a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I know, for example, the World Gold Council is listening in, and it's very important that we align what you have been doing in terms of your mining principles and the work that we're doing, so that we are aligned. I think that's a key message from the industry to the consumers, that if we're aligned, we introduce efficiencies and do a good job. Okay, so that's really the consultation process that's happening at the moment. We want your feedback, but what are really the purpose of this webinar is really to understand what are the differences between version 9 and version 8. So if you'll indulge me, indulge us, we'd like to go through some of the key differences between version 8 and version 9. So starting with, why is recycled gold a focus?
So yeah, I mean, I think we all know that recycled gold is a material source for London good delivery refiners. So, we've introduced a number of enhancements to recycled gold throughout the guidance, from providing clarity on definitions to explicit requirements for identifying the origin of all precious metals sourced by suppliers, rather than, potential sort of focus on direct supply chains only. But, perhaps it's, let me start by sort of framing the sort of key objectives that we had in mind when we set out to do this, right? The first was, we had 3 key objectives, and the first was really to build on the extensive work that was done with the OECD alignment exercise. The second was to really consider the stakeholder feedback that's being gathered through, over time, through direct engagement by the LBMA or in open forums, but also from the trends and the insights from LBMA's ongoing reviews of the refiners and compliance, the refiners compliance and audit reports. And then thirdly, to incorporate the work that's being done at the international bullion centers level. So in terms of recycled gold, we wanted to incorporate those elements into the guidance as well. So I guess the main thing with recycled gold that we need to bear in mind is that there's different types of recycled gold with different risk profiles, and version 9, following this ethos of a risk-based approach, details how to manage these different risk profiles. A key distinction is drawn between recycled gold from intermediate refiners and other high-risk recycled gold sources. And this really is mainly to align to the IBC work and the recommendation for national authorities to embrace responsible sourcing. So, version 9 requires intermediate refiners supplying to a London good delivery refiner to have an independent audit on their sourcing practices. And of course, for a good delivery refiner, this should really help to strengthen the visibility and comfort over these high-risk sources.
Yeah, and you mentioned IBCs there, the International Bullion Centres, and if we have got time today, we have got a slide just to bring people up to speed where we are with the IBCs, which is, again, working with the OECD, working with intergovernmental organisations like FATF, but also to reinforce the point about recycled gold. The last full data set we had is that if you look at all the material going through the good delivery list refineries, 55% of it was recycled material, according to our definitions. And only 44% was coming from large scale mines, and less than 1%, actually 0.56%, if you want to be pedantic, is coming from ASM sources. And I think that's, again, I've said this on many occasions, I think that's quite sad. But if we move on to the second change, elimination of cash, why is that important?
Yeah, and again, I think this is one of the other recommendations in terms of the IBC work that's going on. So to eliminate cash transactions and to increase support for artisanal and small scale mining as well. I mean, Neil, perhaps you're sort of, better placed to talk about some of those areas from an IBC perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is something all the way back to the OECD many years ago. ASM is something that certainly the OECD has been looking to support, and it's something that we adopted a little bit later, but it's certainly something we're fully behind now, is responsible sourcing of ASM material. And we've realized that, putting in more rules and creating more regulations makes it very difficult for ASM to get into the legitimate supply chain. But that's certainly not something we're going to shy away from. We are going to support where we can. For example, forestry and mining is an initiative that the LBMA is supporting, but also over time we've supported arms initiative, we supported the craft code. So if it's responsible, we'll try and support it where we can. But coming back to sorry, Nirali, just the thing about cash. No refinery should be dealing with cash really, but we do understand that cash can be used in the ASM supply chain responsibly. Yes, sorry, Nirali.
Yeah, so I was just going to add on the ASM side of things that, responsible sourcing is certainly not about de-risking or avoiding perceived high-risk jurisdictions or sources altogether. But, I think to be able to do this effectively, and you pointed this out rightly so, in your introductory slides, that it is about striking a balance and working together with refiners, suppliers, authorities, NGOs to really help identify and deal with those root causes and help create those legitimate routes to market for these sources. And so throughout version 9, you'll see more around capacity building and, for refiners to work in consultation and engagement with national authorities and other stakeholders.
Yeah, so ASM is definitely front and center. Next thing that is probably one of the biggest developments in the program is data, and the country of origin data is as somebody who likes numbers, is certainly something that enables us to, shall we say, respond better to where we have claims of illegitimate material moving into the legitimate supply chains. Is real clarity on origin of material. And this again comes back to the recycled gold point that Nirali covered earlier, is we have to be clear about the definitions of material and definitions about the true origin of material. And this is something that the refineries are certainly getting better. We're working together with them to make sure that we're consistent in how we report the origin of material. And again, it's risk-based, and we accept that certain refineries have different risk appetites, but that the true origin of the material is critical here, and the true definition of the material, so that we've got a better understanding of the flows of the material, where it's coming from, but also where it's going to, so that when we do get questioned, that do we understand that this is happening, when we've got facts to be able to back that up. And certainly the data that we want to produce and share, obviously taking into account the sensitive nature of some of the data, I think certainly gives credibility to our program.
Yeah, if I can add a little bit to that as well, I think from a risk assessment point of view or a risk identification side of things, I think there's still some misunderstanding between conflict affected and high risk areas and other red flags. When we look only at CARAs, we're not necessarily taking into account countries that are in breach of sanctions or transit hubs where gold is illegally transferred to non-CARAs and exported to refineries from there. And this is why Dodd-Frank sort of talks about DRC and the 7 surrounding countries. Of course, we know that this isn't just happening in the DRC, right? It's happening in West Africa, in Southern Africa, in Latin America, and so forth. So version 9 really provides further guidance on how to create a more holistic view of geographic or location-based risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yes, it's important because obviously if you look at the rules, the GDL rules, certainly it's very clear about sanctions and how you handle international sanctions. And certainly if you have a sanctioned country on your country of origin list, you have to have a pretty good reason why.
And of course, we're also integrating ESG considerations into the location-based risk assessment.
Yes. And well, that's a nice segue to move on to ESG. Did you want to take the next one, Nirali?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the focus on broader ESG issues is rapidly increasing from all sectors, right? So regulators, civil society, consumers, be it jewelers, electronic manufacturers, wealth managers, as you said before. As you pointed out, ESG is not a new requirement for version 9. It was already introduced in version 8, but with more of a focus on legal compliance, which of course, should be the bare minimum. But as we know, ESG is not always well rated, and even in jurisdictions with good ESG legislation, monitoring of compliance may sometimes fall short. So in version 9, we're taking a broader and more comprehensive view of ESG and aligning to industry standards and benchmarks. I think the other key point around ESG is that we're focusing version 9 on the primary supply chain as the part of the supply chain with the most material ESG impacts overall. Now, this isn't to say that there's no material ESG risks in the secondary gold supply chain. Obviously things like, or issues such as energy management, emissions, health and safety may be just as crucial, if not more, at intermediate refiners. However, in the interest of making pragmatic step changes, it was decided to focus version 9 on the primary supply chain, with version 10 then introducing requirements for the recycled gold supply chain and so forth. So the one thing I would say is that refiners can certainly start preparing intermediate refiners, that this is in the pipeline and will come to the fore in due course.
Yeah, and that definition of intermediate refiner is quite important here. So to understand that, and again, as an ex-refiner, there are intermediate refiners that you deal with who are doing other processing, maybe processing some low-grade material, upgrading low-grade material, but they still need to play by the same rules. Just a self-plug, if you want to look at about ESG benchmarking, then there was a recent webinar with the World Gold Council and representative of Barrick. I think I was on that webinar as well. So if you would like to see that, it's still available on our website. Yes, ESG, it's front and center, and it's important. Risk mitigation. What's the difference between version 9 and version 8 in terms of risk mitigation?
Yeah, I'd say the key edits to step 3 risk mitigation were really around clarity and presentation, more so than the new requirements. Having said this, it's now fully aligned to the OECD guidance. So when to terminate or suspend trade is now fully aligned to OECD due diligence requirements, as are the timeframes for improvement plans and monitoring activities when trade is continued with a high-risk supplier. So, I think that was a pretty sort of straightforward.
Yeah. That's sort of version 8, version 9 sort of clearing up things. Nothing revolutionary there. Okay, this is probably one of the important things that we do need to spend a little bit of time on, is the auditor and the auditor independence, the audit quality. There's a couple of significant changes here.
Yeah, I guess, let's start with the auditor independence, right? So again, not a new concept, but auditor independence is explicitly called out, as independence is, crucial for the third-party assurance to carry the weight and provide comfort to the stakeholders on refiners' practices. And this is reflective of the broader initiatives in the audit profession. So version 9 really is aligning with these broader sector initiatives and introduces mandatory audit firm or audit partner at the least rotation every 10 years. Having said this, LBMA is cognizant that auditor capacity may be constrained in some jurisdictions, and therefore, this is going to be applicable on a comply or explain basis.
Yeah, I mean, capacity certainly is something that we need to be aware of, and certain jurisdictions are harder than others to make sure that you've got the capacity. So if you look at the IBC work, there's a number of jurisdictions that have got a number of refineries, so therefore there is enough capacity. But we've got some countries where there's only one refinery, and it can be quite remote. So certainly capacity of the audit program is very important. Making sure we have enough trained auditors to cover all of the refineries is very important.
Yeah, and the other sort of really big change from an audit perspective is the move to reasonable assurance every year. And the rationale behind this really is that, typically ISA 3000, which is the assurance standard for LBMA responsible sourcing audits, has provided an option for limited assurance in recognition that non-financial reporting systems may not be as formalized or mature as financial reporting systems. But as companies work on improving these areas, some assurance can still be provided to stakeholders. But RGG now has been running for about 10 years, and in that time, refiners' due diligence processes and systems have certainly matured. Plus, there's an increasing need for higher level of assurance from stakeholders as the spotlight on supply chain and responsible sourcing just keeps getting brighter. And so, taking those aspects into consideration, it was felt that reasonable assurance would deliver the most meaningful results.
Yeah, definitely. And also from experience, the reasonable engagement is a lot more useful to the refinery. You get a lot more for your money. And I know it costs a little bit more, but you certainly do get a lot more benefits from the reasonable assurance process.
Yeah, and as I understand it, I think many refiners are, already voluntarily choosing a reasonable level of assurance each year in any case, right? Because they see, as you said, they see it as a valuable control for risk management.
Yeah, very much so. And moving on, the disclosure guidance, and if you looked at the timeline earlier, you'll see that the disclosure guidance has already been published. And this is really a move to really address as an industry to share when something goes wrong or something is newsworthy or noteworthy. We should be able to share that with the wider market, and certainly to stakeholders who are interested in what the industry is doing. So the disclosure guidance, again, taking into account sensitivities, commercial sensitivities, but really to get into a position where we are sharing the information that we need to be sharing. Nirali, I don't know whether you want to comment on the disclosure.
Yeah, sorry, close my, I think from my perspective, the main benefit of the disclosure guidance is for compliance reports to really reflect this dynamic due diligence process that takes place. What we've seen over the years is standardization of compliance reports describing policies, processes, management systems, which typically don't change significantly from year to year. But what is important for stakeholders to understand is performance, right? So, what are the results of the due diligence? How effectively are high risks being addressed? So more specifically, the disclosure guidance is asking for disclosures on suppliers and in high risk locations. And this is really a specific requirement of the OECD. So again, we're aligning to OECD fully. Details on risk management, risk mitigation or management strategies applied to high risk suppliers and the progress of those strategies and improvement plans. And then also to ensure this consistency between audit reports and the compliance report. There's also disclosure requirements for any medium and high risk non-conformances and how the refiner expects to deal with these. So, to me, this is really about providing the right type of information that stakeholders are interested in with, as you say, due regard to business confidentiality. Yeah.
So that's really the main changes between version 9 and version 8. Again, it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary, but it's a part of the constant process. So we really do want we want to hear what you're saying. What is concerning you? What are your challenges? So please reach out to us. Use the ways that we've outlined there, and let us know what your thoughts. Before we move on to what's coming next, there are a couple of questions. I don't know whether you can see those questions, Nirali. The first one I can answer. Are the proposed version 9 ESG requirements consistent with the recent publication of ESG standards from RMI, the Responsible Minerals Initiative? What are the differences? Now, obviously, we work closely, we work with the RMI and the RJC to make sure that our standards are aligned as much as possible. And I know for a fact that we're looking at the mutual recognition documentation at the moment to make sure that where we can be aligned, we are aligned.
Yeah, if I can add to that, yes, we've taken a look at existing industry standards applicable for the gold mining sector. We've looked at all of the work that's being done by industry associations like RMI, the Responsible Jewelry Council, the Copper Mark, and also guidance like the Global Reporting Initiative, SASB, Sustainable Development Goals. So, we've taken a sort of very broad review of what's out there in terms of ESG requirements to help come up with these sort of material considerations for miners. What's important to understand from an ESG perspective is that just as we have with in the current refiners toolkit, we provide KYC questionnaires for the conflict and threat financing risks. LBMA is also looking to incorporate additional practical guidance on how to carry out ESG risk assessments. And as Neil said, this guidance will also take into account the supplier's conformance with ESG standards like the World Gold Council or the International Council of Mining and Metals, IRMA, and so forth, to really avoid that duplication of effort and also to help standardize the requirements for all refiners.
Okay, I see there's a follow-up on that. That this particular attendee is quite keen. It appears, perhaps incorrectly, that the LBMA requirements are guidance, whereas the RMI is an auditable standard. Is that correct? No. Obviously, the responsible sourcing program is mandatory for LBMA refiners. The audit is mandatory. You must do it every year. Guidance is a word that we use, but no, it is an auditable standard, and it is mandatory for LBMA refineries. Okay, I think that just clears that up. And the last one is quite a simple one to ask. When we talk about question on eliminating cash transactions, what is your advice on the refining service charges and staff wish to buy a small size of investment coin? But obviously that's out of scope. We're talking about if you're using cash to source material. And sorry, the keen attendee has just acknowledges the fact that he's a keen attendee. Yeah, so we're talking about using cash in your sourcing practices. Obviously, certain refineries have a retail operation where they sell products. That's perfectly legitimate business. Okay, again, if you have questions, please send them through to us. We will attempt to answer them. If we can't answer them all today, we'll certainly sort of put them together and see if we can respond through our newsletter or through direct communication. Moving on, I mean, again, I'm conscious of time here. Where are we going? What is the strategy of the LBMA? Why are we doing this? Because it's very nice to say, right, it's changing. You now have to do this, but there has to be a rationale. There has to be a reason. It can't be change for change's sake. And the key point is continuous improvement, because things change, life changes. Life has been very interesting over the last couple of years, and some of those challenges need to be addressed. Things like remote auditing, things like that. It's been difficult to visit mine sites, but that's some operational challenges. But what we need to do is we need to continuously improve our standards and business practices to ensure that our industry is sustainable. And we're going to do that through, again, we've talked about the disclosure document. What are the best standards? Improving the standards, making people accountable, who are accountable, making sure that our audit program, you can believe in our audit program, working with the challenging higher risk, like Nirali says. High risk doesn't mean you can't deal with that particular jurisdiction. You just have to do the right level of work. But also, it's all about the future. Nirali, would you like to share your thoughts on where we're going and where you're going with responsible sourcing?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think LBMA is doing a lot of great work in this space, right? So, like we talked about, there's a lot of efforts being put into the responsible gold guidance and all of the sort of supplementary documents that go with it. But also from an audit perspective, a lot of work is being done to make sure that, you know, and in response to the question earlier, that the program is auditable and the quality of the audits is you know, the consistency is increased and leveled out. So yeah, a lot of work's happening, you know, and you know, from where I'm sitting as well, I think there's initiatives in place to look at technology at LBMA as well, right? Technology solutions to help support all of these areas. And as standards get more and more stringent and the scope grows as it needs to, you know, I think the technology side of things will start playing a bigger role and a more important role to bring through those efficiencies that are required.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's certainly, again, people are asking for more. They want to know more about the provenance of the products that they're buying and investing in. And technology definitely has a role to play here. And it sort of touches upon, the LBMA is not doing this in isolation. There's also initiatives around the gold bar integrity work, for example. But very important piece of work, which is going hand in hand with this, is the work that we mentioned earlier about the international bullion centers. And Taylor, if you want to spend a few minutes discussing the international bullion centers. This is really to eliminate gold as a bad thing. So gold can be a good thing, but if it's been used for bad things, it's not good. Sorry, that was a bit simplistic. But really, we've had good engagement. We launched this in 2020. And what we did is we identified centers around the world where they've got a heavy involvement in the industry, whether it's refining, whether it's the source, or whether it's warehousing or processing. So we've had very, very good engagement, been very busy, a lot of talking to a lot of people. That led on to the OECD's an intergovernmental meeting, which happened a couple of weeks ago, which again, FATF was involved in that. And we sort of shared our thoughts on where we're going. And all of the centers have committed to working together to improve responsible sourcing standards all over the world. And we may have initially got some resistance, but once people realized that it's for the good of all, certainly we've had some people really getting on board with this initiative and making sure that they're bringing in systems to combat to eliminate gold laundering. And like I said, the FATF was involved in that, and there's going to be a report coming out from the Financial Action Task Force on this very issue. I thought it had already come out, but it's due out. The next steps, yeah. Well, like I say, we opened up this session by saying the next steps are, we need to hear from you. We need to hear from you in this consultation. We need to hear about your thoughts, your concerns, so that we can move forward in a positive manner. So that's my final remarks. I don't know whether you have any final remarks, Nirali.
Sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting myself. Standard thing these days, isn't it? No, look, I think we've covered pretty much all of the sort of key points. The consultation is where we're looking for feedback. You know, I'm also very keen to see the feedback on the ESG side of things, because you know, we are introducing broader requirements. This is an very important aspect of the guidance. And you know, we want to make sure that it's pragmatic, but also delivering real meaningful results at the end of the day. So, you know, looking forward to all of the feedback that's received through the consultation.
Yeah. Okay. And again, once again, thanks from the LBMA to you, Nirali, for holding down a number of jobs at the same time. And I believe you've got another webinar straight after this one. but your support on version 9 has been most welcome.
Thanks, pleasure.
Okay, Taylor, that's our chat for today.
Great, thank you very much, Nirali and Neil, for joining us and providing all those updates on the new version of the Responsible Gold Guidance. As mentioned earlier, if you do have any questions that come to you after the webinar, or you are listening to a pre-recorded version of this, please do email us at ask@lbma.org.uk. I will wrap them up and send them to a nice little email to Neil and Nirali so that they can offer you a reply. In terms of upcoming webinars and events, we have the LBMA Virtual Annual General Meeting next week, Thursday, the 1st of July. So if you are a member, please do register to attend if you haven't already done so. If you are a voting member, please do ensure you do this as soon as possible so we can send out your information. You can vote in advance of the meeting, you can vote during the meeting. We've got all the options available to you. And again, just email us if you have any questions about that whatsoever. Unfortunately, and I'm devastated, our summer social has been cancelled due to government regulations being extended. So that is not going ahead. So the next in-person event that we will have is our networking reception on the 20th of September. So if you were hoping to get along to that, it is no longer going ahead, but the one which ties into our virtual precious metals conference is going ahead. So a little update on that. And on the 8th of July, there'll be a webinar which is the highlights of the AGM. So if you do miss the virtual AGM this coming Thursday, you can catch up on that later. The updates of what's going on in LBMA at the moment. And then of course, as I mentioned, our lovely conference coming up this September. So hold the dates for that. We'll have more announcements coming up on that in due course. If you do have any questions about any of the events or anything that was discussed today, again, you can head to our website, our social media accounts, or any of the emails that you have that belong to an LBMA employee, and send us an email and we will get back to you with the appropriate answer. So thank you. And thank you again, Neil and Nirali. I hope you all have a lovely afternoon, a lovely weekend ahead, and we'll see you next time for LBMA webinars.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Nirali.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.